Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Hey folks, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're doing something new, a little bit different. I'm catching up with my good friend Carl.boasman in something we're calling Now and Next. Carl's been on the podcast before, and he's an experienced director and former principal officer in the UK Fire and Rescue Service. He has a vast knowledge and experience in operations, in coaching, in mentoring, and since coming on the podcast, Carl's joined the team. And we're incredibly lucky and privileged to have him with us, and we're trying to do something where maybe every month, maybe more frequently than that, but kind of do a monthly basis. We're going to do a Now and Next, where we draw people's attention to some of the great stuff that's happening in the UK Fire and Rescue Service, try and highlight some good topics, have a bit of a chat about it, give our thoughts and unsolicited opinions, and have a bit of a regular catch-up. Touch on some guests that we've spoken to, what's happening for us, what's happening in the world of the podcast, where are we heading with it, and hopefully you find it really interesting. I always love chatting with Carl. He always brings a really good perspective and lens to things and kind of acts as a really good mirror and sounding board for me. Really helps with the strategic direction of the podcast. So it's a pleasure to bring him on and have these chats with him, hopefully on a regular basis. Good for listeners and observers of the podcast to know as well. If they want to get in contact, they can reach out to Carl for any of the more strategic stuff or the highbrow stuff. Or if you think I'm just a bit too weird and wonderful to do any work with, Carl is your man to reach out to as well. So that's the template for today's episode, and I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you on the other side. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. I always say, let's trust each other till I give you a reason not to.
Yeah, I'm up for that.
What have you been doing the last few days then?
I've been working. I've been doing a bit of incident command assessing this week. So Monday, working for company Peter Stanley training, doing some role playing and incident command assessing, and then I've been working for a company doing some business continuity and emergency response kind of work with them. So
what level of incident command you been doing this week?
It was advanced. No, it wasn't. It was strategic. So it was a level 4 gold incident command assessment for two aspiring people who are moving up into those roles. So
obviously, we're not going to say the services and the places and people they belong to and all that jazz, but how do you still enjoy that? Is it still the same? Are they folding in a load of new national bits? Has it evolved at all, the sort of command training that you do now?
Yeah, I think the really interesting thing about seeing people from all over the country is you see different ways of doing things, and with the 46, 47 FRSs across the country, everybody's got a different way. And the thing that does still surprise me is that, some people use Jessup to the letter. Some don't tend to use it too much, and another sort of find a midway point. And I think, given that it is kind of the standard that we all kind of...
Have we not learnt from Manchester yet?
Yeah, I think it's there. I think it's still there, and I still think we've made some. I've been left 10 months now, but I still saying we. So forgive me,
dude. It'll always be we. Don't do that to yourself. Come on, don't be that guy. It's like me saying, "Oh well, my ex-wife. Sorry. Oh yeah, violin. Get over it." You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah. So interesting. It's really, and I think the thing around the whole Jessup thing, it's still taking a while to embed, but. For me, it's really interesting. It's great to see people doing things different ways. And I think incident command is one of those arts where, there is a sort of a baseline of what good looks like, and then people kind of bring their own unique style to that.
I think leadership's an art form, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. It really is. And some people use a very systematic approach to it, and some people apply a little bit of flair and flamboyance, which is always good to see. And it's great to learn from as well. I think one of the things I used to love in the job was when I was a training instructor teaching incident command and assessing incident command was you learnt a lot, and you've probably seen it yourself, Pete, in terms of you do learn a lot from people, that whole seeing what good looks like and thinking, do you know what?
It's different ways to say stuff, isn't it? It's just like when you hear a great turn of phrase and you go, oh, I'm having that. I'm going to use that. I'm a walk-in sort of amalgamation of turns of phrases. And they're just the best things that I hear people say. And I always think, like I've said before, ask better questions, you get better answers. And I see that nothing better than when I see it in incident command or when I see it in really high emotional situations. And just when you see someone say something a certain way, and it always hits me. I love those moments because it's when I feel most present. When you see, when I see someone do process too much, I find it really distancing.
Yeah.
And there's a time and a place for it. Do you think there's a percentage? Like, do you have a personal cocktail flavour that you like 40% personal, 60% process, or 80% process and 20% personal? Do you have a personal preference?
Yeah, I think I do, and I think that there's things that I always forget. For example, in the JESIP process, you've got your decision controls, and there's a point at which you can be going around, particularly at a strategic coordination group, you can be going around a discussion, and at some point somebody needs to say, right, we need to apply some decision controls to this because that's the purpose for decision controls. But it's very easy to get sort of drawn into the conversation, keep it going round. That's the job of the chair. But I think for me, definitely, I think there's got to be some process there, and there's got to be some, and the way that we train incident commanders is about a process, it's about a system, but then you've got to bring your own personal style to that. We've probably all worked with commanders that instill confidence in you from the moment you see them. I can remember one of the best incident commanders I've ever worked with was my first sub-officer, and he was bomb-proof. He was just absolutely unflappable. And I think back to some of the jobs we turned up and sort of me arriving on station as a young 20-year-old probationer and being terrified on your way to thinking, God, this is a big one. And you pitch up and just having that absolute steady, calm, unflappable presence that knows what they're doing is absolutely fantastic. And I think then you got the other side of the scale, which people will try and apply a process because they don't feel that confidence, they haven't got that confidence. And I think it's really important to have a blend of the two, isn't it? And I think for me, sometimes it's about the process, sometimes it's about, but ultimately we trust people, don't we? We follow people.
Yeah.
What's that you've thrown up, Pete?
People follow people, is the point that I think you make there. So I always think of it with sales. People don't buy a thing, people buy from people. You've got to make yourself that person's friend. And when you were talking then, have you ever seen this before? It's from Dr. Nikki Power. I don't think I've actually put her episode out yet, but we're going to put it out in a couple of weeks.
No.
Oh, mate, this is great. So let me just zoom back for a second, and I'll just pull up, because I know we're going to include this in the episode. I'll pull it up who this individual is, because she hasn't come out yet, and I'll probably release this episode before hers, which we'll talk about. We're going to talk about the podcast in a minute anyway. So Nikki Power is a senior lecturer, associate professor in psychology, researching teamwork, interoperability, and decision-making in extreme environments. Awesome. University of Liverpool. She's actually good friends with Dan Stevens. Lovely, lovely lady. Really, really like her. And one of her parts of her research, and I'll not remember which one it is, and she did this with another lady, and I'm failing to remember the other lady's name, so I apologise. But anyway, they came up with this decision inertia loop, which you can see on the screen now, and I'll try and find a way to share this with people as well. So, because it's kind of what you were talking about there, isn't it? We do have to make a decision. So if I try and verbally articulate my way through this, and we'll back and forth it for a second. But so what they've got here, folks, is top left: incident occurs, situational assessment. So we're all unsure of that, and then what's the outcome of that? Deliberation or uncertainty. So if you're uncertain, you're going to continue to deliberate. And then option generation, you're going to come up with some options. Still feeling uncertain, option evaluation. And then what most likely happens because of our natural sort of pre-indication to negative outcomes is we anticipate negative consequences. We go, what if I do this? And the negative consequences could be, it should just be, will the incident run well or not? But how often do you find, certainly in incident command assessments, they're like, what will other people say?
Yeah, well, I think if you think about what people are fearful of, and I've been there myself, I'm sure you have, Pete, our reputation and our
hate
credibility
that
as an instant commander is important to us, and I think it's
hate
a human thing, isn't it? And we can't get away from that. And sometimes that can drive decision making. If I make pumps 10 and it turns out we only need 4, then what are people going to say? Well, I've always said, well, it doesn't matter. They weren't looking at what you.
Have you always said that though? Have you grown into that though? Because I've personally grown into that.
No, I've absolutely.
I didn't say that as a first brand new incident commander. I'll be honest.
Yeah, and I've sat and listened to people say, "God, they made 8 and they could have done with 4." And some really interesting conversations I've had over the years about this. But for me, it's always been, I'd rather be looking at it than looking for it. And we sometimes undersell ourselves, don't we, as a fire risk, thinking that we'll make do with 4 pumps when really we could do with 6. Well, use your resources because it proves that you need them. Is one of those. Don't try and make do with 4 when you need 6.
Yeah. And again, we're not trying to justify the job and keep the numbers up or anything like that. But you're like, don't just. It's the same with crewing and everything. It's like, oh, do you reckon you can? At some point, we said let's take them from 5 to 4 on the trucks, didn't we? And everyone went, and we went penny pinching, blah blah blah, and we justified it. Some people, no doubt, got promotions off the back of it, and I know we haven't got a limitless budget and all this sort of stuff. But I certainly agree with you in the makeup. I'm like, what's the worst thing that will happen? We'll turn them round. If the worst complaint we have today is Carl got us out of bed for that goddamn skip fire last night, and what? I tell you what, when we're driving back, we'll drive past those men and women working on the roadside at 3 a.m. Yeah, do you want to get out and join them? And I know this is me being a bit of a dick, but I'm like, that is a hard job. Do you know what I mean? And this is where I think I have the privilege of, like, my dad ran in a building firm for 40 whatever years, and I'm like, that is hard work. That is really hard work. That guy there is waiting for, in 3 hours' time, he can get in that cold white van to have a half-eaten pasty that he doesn't want, and the heating doesn't work. That is a hard job. Where are you going? You're going back to bed. And that's really triggering for me, obviously, as I say it there. But I'm like, order them. Send them back. Don't worry about it.
It's easy to, isn't it? And I think it's just that thing about, judging other people's decisions. It's just so easy to do that, isn't it? And I think I see it a lot in commanders who are clearly thinking about, what's the rationale for the makeup. And I think now a lot of commanders do sort of think a lot about, the size of the makeup and so on and so forth. But I think the thing that we just need to remember is, if you think you need 6, you probably need 8. If you think you need 8, you probably need 10. We always tend to err on that side of sort of caution a little bit. And it comes down to that thing about the possible negative consequences, is that the human thing is that we are hardwired to remember the bad stuff, aren't we? Because it's what's kept us alive. It's, and it does play out in command decision making, and it's that inertia which is illustrated really well.
No one remembers Carl the caveman and the 27 times he went up to the bush and it was just a rustle. We just remember Carl the caveman that got eaten by the saber-toothed tiger because he went up to the bush.
Exactly.
So now, and that's the whole. It's the monkeys in the cage behavioural concept. Do you remember that one where I probably said this ad nauseum on the podcast, but a bunch of monkeys in the cage at the zoo. And the handlers, they're doing a psychological. It's probably something Dr. Nicky would do, although she wouldn't do this. It's maybe a bit inhumane. But they, all the monkeys, and they put the food on a top shelf in this massive, large cage, and that's where they put the food. And they leave it up there for an hour, and then they put some more food on the bottom. But when they put the food at the top, any monkeys that try and go up and get it, they spray them with these really hard water cannons, and they spray all the monkeys until the monkeys don't try and go up there. And then over the course of weeks or months or whatever, when they put the food at the top and one of the monkeys tries to go up there, the other monkeys will grab it and hit it and beat it to stop it going up and getting the food, because they know if it goes to get the food, everyone gets sprayed. And then over a period of months, they switch out all of the monkeys until none of the monkeys have ever been sprayed by water. But every time the food goes up, they all beat the monkeys that try to go up there until no monkeys try to go up there. And none of them realise why they're not going up there. They just don't go up there.
It's conformity, isn't it? It's that whole thing about, there's a brilliant video on YouTube that I use sometimes during sort of leadership sessions about conformity.
Okay.
And in brief, it's about people going into an optician's waiting room, and they're sat there, and one person is a member of the public, just don't know what they're going on. The rest of the people in there, let's say there's 9 other people in there, all actors, and they are sort of briefed that when there's a beep, they stand up.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you've seen it, and we could probably post it. Actually, I'll find the link if you want. We'll post it because, and long story short, what happens is this young lady sort of sat there, and every time there's a beep, she observes other people standing up every time there's a beep, and it takes about twice or three times before she starts joining them. So literally, when there's a beep, she doesn't ask anybody, doesn't do it, just literally says, "That's what goes on around. That's what that's what happens."
Yeah.
And then literally, one by one, these 9 people are all taken out of the mix, and she's sat there on her own, standing up every time there's a beep. And what the interesting part is, and it sort of links into what you just said, is that when new people start coming in who are members of the public, she carries it on. And literally, there's a guy walks in, and she's up and down, and he actually says to her, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, that's what we do." And he goes, "Oh, all right." And literally, then he starts, and everybody else. So with no reason, but that conformity, fitting in, social norms, Have
you seen the ones about the length of a line?
No.
We could ad nauseum go about these. We'll make this the last one, but they're sitting doing a bunch of general knowledge, or it might be a IQ test. And then they start throwing in some extra questions at the end. So we're just doing some sample questions, and the rapport in the group has been so good. Everyone's sort of high-fiving each other. We've all got really IQs, and you've created that group identity of being a very intelligent group. So this has happened over the course of a couple of hours, and at the end they start throwing some other stuff in. And obviously there's only 1 or 2, and I think there's 5 student studies in there, and everyone else is actors. And they start throwing things up around, like one of them, which is the best one, is there's 2 lines on the board. One is clearly longer than the other. And they have quite an in-depth, like 10, 15-minute discussion. And collectively as a group, they decide. And when they say collectively as a group, they need to have 4 out of 5 of the non-actors. Otherwise, because obviously the rest of the group try and manipulate them and stuff like this. And 4 out of the 5 non-actors agree that one of these lines is clearly longer than the other. When it is clearly, it's a good like 2 or 3 centimetres. I mean, if you stood back far enough from the board, you could think they're maybe the same size, but to say that this, and it's something like that is just, and as people hear me now, because I've only said it over 30 seconds, they're like, "Oh, absolute BSP, that's rubbish." It happens. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's looking at a wall for long enough, and you go in, "No, it's definitely green, and the wall I'm sat with right is blue. It's blue. Everyone can see it's blue."
Yeah.
But you see that with right, wrong. You see that with debriefs. When you look at debriefs for long enough and you go, "No, you know what? I don't know what Carl was thinking. I don't know what he was thinking. You know what? Actually, now I think about it more, I think Carl's actually incompetent." And you're like, whoa, hang on a minute. This person you've worked with for 30 years, who's had an exemplary record in ABC and XYZ, has managed all these major incidents, and he's done this small thing, which you don't fully understand the why behind. And again, it's the same with the standing up, sitting down, monkeys in the cage. You don't understand the why behind it. So now you're questioning their entire identity based on this. I can't believe Carl said that. Actually, maybe he's sexist. I've always thought Carl's sexist. Really?
And that's when, and we talked about this when we did the podcast earlier in the year, Pete, didn't we? Around the stories that build around people, the cognitive dissonance, that despite what despite the facts in front of you, you will kind of twist it around to sort of fit your own belief system, and it's a really powerful thing, and that's where sometimes in groups those stories and those myths and those legends start to appear. But
I always like to caveat with, "Have you ever met them?" And people are like, "No, I've never." Well, shut up, then. You never even
exactly.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the center of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. That integrates straight in with the Luna system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity in the brand new MSA Connected Firefighter platform. Now back to the show.
So Pete, I was gonna just for the benefit of the listener, I wondered if it was worth us kind of saying out where this
introducing what the hell we're doing.
Yeah, what do you think? Because it's been a long time in the making.
Mate, it has. So, yeah. In fact, you go. You give us some context about what you think we're doing today, because I know we both are on the same page. But again, it's a great interpretation of what Carl's expectations are, what my expectations are, what our expectations of the podcast are, what we want to do, because this is something we want to try and do on a moderately regular basis if it proves beneficial. And we're going to cover a smorgasbord of stuff today. So give us a bit of a kickoff, because also you've not been back on since you became part of the team. So I'd love to give us that little intro, because you're a massively valuable member of the team, and you're something that, like I said, we released a podcast with me and Sarah recently. And also I did an apology on social media recently as well. I love putting myself around high-performing individuals who hold me to a better standard, who help me develop. And if you just say those things, and the hypocrisy of then just surrounding yourself with your mates who encourage or justify your bad behaviours, who enable you, how are we supposed to grow? I want to put myself around people like you who hold me to a higher standard. Pete, is that what we're about? Pete, is that the best version of you? That sort of stuff. But sorry, you go in and say what. I mean, why did you come on as part of the team, brother?
Yeah, so I'm really privileged and felt really humbled to be asked to be part of the podcast team. And I think, when I did my podcast with yourself earlier in the year, it was great to sort of just talk about and have the opportunity to talk about, career and memories and experiences, etc. But the thing that I've always enjoyed about the podcast is it's having a really positive impact on the sector. I think there are many podcasts out there, and they all have their own purpose. But I think one of the things I've seen, is the podcast has grown. The quality of guests that you get on, the depth of the conversation. It's wonderful, and the feedback that certainly I had from my podcast was fantastic. The feedback that we get from listeners is fantastic. And one of the things that sort of struck me really was being able to sort of join the team and be part of it and support in some way alongside Sarah, who also does a fantastic job.
Sarah's ride or die. She's great. Very different role in the podcast, brings a beautiful different lens and perspective to what we do. But were you disappointed at all when you realised how disorganised I am?
Not at all. And in many ways, I don't think you are. I think you're doing yourself a misjustice there. For what you do, one of the things I wanted to sort of talk about and maybe turn the spotlight on you a little bit, Pete, was when I meet people and tell them about I'm involved with the podcast, etc. But many people say we don't know much about Pete. They say, well, who? Who's Pete? We know he's a firefighter. We know he does. We feel as though we know Pete through the podcast. But what about Pete? Tell us a little bit about Pete. And I wondered if there was some way we could maybe have a little talk about you today, Pete. A little bit about the history of the podcast. And with this being sort of the first one that we've done, we were thinking about doing a now and next, weren't we? The state of things.
Yeah.
And almost, we did talk about it being a religion, politics and football free zone, which would have been really hard during the Euros to do. But that's it. We sort of keep the big three out of this. Yeah. And I think, let's keep it positive. Let's keep it, the now and next, in the sector and wider than the sector as well, because there's so many influences.
I think we might call it that, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and I think that was the idea, and as we sit here at the moment it's 10 a.m. We're not down the pub, we're drinking coffee, but one day we might do one down the pub. You never know.
I keep wanting to come and meet your beautiful family. I know we're going to do a barbecue day. The weather's really good with us at the minute. We need to crowbar that in at some point, because you've got a wonderful, the Boasman clan are a good bunch of eggs by the look of it.
Yeah, thank you, and the diary's been against us, but we must do so. How's about this is about a little bit about you, a little bit about the podcast.
Go on.
And I was wondering as well, maybe some quick fire questions, Pete. We've talked about decision making.
Yep.
Let's maybe have some quick fire questions, and we can look at you limbering up, and we can maybe.
I'm ready for it. Hit me. So
we can maybe get people to know who is Pete Wakefield. That people have said to me, is it Pete from Wakefield? Says no, it's not Pete from Wakefield.
I don't know where the origin of the name comes from, to be honest. My parents actually have Scottish heritage. So my dad's mum was Campbell, or is a Campbell. Well, she's dead now. But so that there's a little bit of thing there. I know that wasn't inherently a question, but no, I love the Scottish side of it, and there's a bit of Irish in there as well. But the Scottish heritage, I quite like that. I think if I ever get married again, I'll still get married in a kilt again. I quite like that. But anyway.
Nice one. Yeah, I'm from Scottish heritage as well, so it's I'm with you on that one. It's
apparently the Campbells are hated in places still. Apparently there's I think they killed lots of people. I should know more about this. My dad knows all the history. There's like signs on doors on like shops, no Campbells. I'm like, oh God. But anyway,
really,
don't tell anyone.
So Pete, maybe keep that quiet if you go to Scotland. Tell us, so the podcast then, so it's grown and it's a phenomenal resource out there, and we have thousands and thousands of listeners, and so just tell us, how did it all start?
There's I suppose it's a podcast, so we'll go for the long version. How did the podcast start? It started for three combining reasons, three like overlapping Venn diagrams, if you will. So one of those diagrams is me as a person. So there's the person, the thing, and then what it's about, I suppose. So the person, me, I have always struggled with knowing myself, probably. And that manifested through getting lost in lots of stuff when I was younger, lots of places I shouldn't have been, doing lots of things I shouldn't have done, and that leads into my addictions that I've spoken about publicly many times. And then through that process, I went to Narcotics Anonymous, which is a national body. Everybody knows what AA is. There's also something called Narcotics Anonymous, specifically for drug use. And you can go to regional meetings, you can go to online meetings, you get a sponsor. It's a great community, very, very valuable. I think doesn't get the publicity that it deserves. I think drug use is, obviously alcohol is a drug. So Alcoholics Anonymous is almost even a subcategory of Narcotics Anonymous, because even though it's bigger than it is, alcohol's like the social drug, isn't it? Anyway, so I still struggle with addiction, really. But in the throes of my addiction, it was predominantly performance-enhancing drugs, steroids, growth hormone, but then a lot of amphetamines, speed, and an uncomfortable shorter period of time with cocaine, which was very, very, very. That was when we the cheese nearly slipped all the way off the cracker during that period of time.
So I was going to ask you, Pete, was there a pivotal moment that for you that kind of said,
when my daughter was born? Yeah. I think like echoing back to our self-narrative and convincing ourselves and all this sort of stuff, we're very good at lying to ourselves, justifying our behaviours to ourselves, aren't we? Well, I said that because, Carl's a dick and he deserved it. Okay. And we just justify our behaviours. I did this because of that and all this sort of stuff. And I was very good at lying to myself. And I was really good at lying to other people, actually. I could stare you square in the eye and tell you I didn't take drugs. Obviously, I had to do that every day because I was part of the Fire and Rescue Service during this period of time. I joined the Fire and Rescue Service just before my 18th birthday. When I was already in my addictions then. And that continued until I was 23 was when I'd probably say I stopped properly. Slipped back in a few times and all that jazz. But that was when that probably stopped. And that was when my daughter was born. And there was just something really, really inherent. You've got children, Carl. And the idea of lying to your children, sometimes that's not a big enough line. People can do that. I think I've really struggled. Not that it's an aspiration. I don't want to lie to my children. But the idea of doing it was really, really hard. So I started engaging in some help. Actually, big thanks to a few people that I worked with at that time. A guy called Richard, a lady called Grace, who was actually my line manager at the time at a big manufacturing, fast-moving consumer goods company that I worked for at the time. She was fantastic. And I actually worked in a job called CI at the time, so continuous improvement, which was all about behavioral change. You do this in Six Sigma and Kaizen and marginal gains. And we did a lot of really, really great training. And as part of that training, it encouraged a lot of self-reflection. And like, why do you think the way you think? How can you change your behaviors and all this sort of stuff? How can we embed a seed of an idea in someone and all this sort of stuff? And you started dragging lots of uncomfortable stuff out of you because you have a lot of group discussions. And I imagine you've been through similar processes with the senior leadership training where some people are like, I'm at work here. I wasn't actually anticipating dragging on my personal life out in front of my colleagues. I'm not really comfortable with this. But I was kind of ready. It's a bit like, you know, when they say, when the student's ready, the teacher will emerge. Have you ever heard that statement? I think you have to be ready for it, don't you? You know, when you meet lots of people in your life and you're like, oh, Carl would have been great for me 10 years ago. I just didn't meet him then. Or actually, I'm not ready to meet you now. Yeah. And it's kind of like, you've got to meet each other, haven't you?
Yeah, and I've been fortunate in that, you know, I've never had that journey with addiction, but I did try. I quit smoking once, and I think that's. I was addicted to smoking in my younger years, and I did quit that, and that was hard enough. And I think understanding that, how hard that is for an addiction, and I think you're right in terms of many people struggle with addiction, but it's only until there's something changes in your life, in their life, that makes them want to accept that help or access that help. And I've tried to help people with addiction as well, and it's not and my journey in trying to help somebody with addiction was just the biggest learning I got out of that, was when they're ready, they'll be ready, and you know, sadly the person never was ready, but accepting that as it is incredibly hard when you're trying to help somebody. So I kind of recognize that. I think it's a powerful thing, and I think, you know, and when you went for the how hard did you find it, or easy did you find it to sort of make that first step? That is often the one that is often the hardest I would get. I
sat at least. I actually started with online meetings, camera off, microphone off, basically a lecture. You know, so I might as well have been listening to a YouTube video because I didn't want to participate, because you don't want to see yourself in other people. Because some of the people on those calls and in those meetings, their life was really, really, really falling apart. The very little of their life they had left, they seemed to be setting fire to their own small amount of joy that they had left. You know, the only things that they had left that were important to them, relationships with family or estranged children, they just couldn't stop self-sabotaging. And so it was very hard to start with, because I didn't want to see myself as one of those people. You know, you go into a room and someone, it's like when I hear people with learning difficulties, and they go, oh, do you want to go to this SEN school, special educational needs? And they go to that school and everyone's wearing a scrum hat. And, you know, and this is very offensive and stereotypical, but, you know, everyone's wearing a scrum hat. They're chewing crayons and licking windows. That is not what it is like there. But let's just stereotype that, because my ex worked in special educational needs, and the spectrum of special educational needs is enormous. You know, I've got ADHD and there's lots of different things. But anyway, people would have that stereotype in their head. They go, oh, you know, Carl, maybe you would flourish most in a different learning environment. And they go for an introduction day at one of these schools, and one of the children just really struggles to engage in any kind of conversation. Maybe they're really violent, maybe whatever. And anyway, it was similar to that, because I saw people, I was like, well, I'm not like these people. Jesus Christ, I'm in the fire service, for God's sake. I've got children. I've got my own house, you know. So there was a kind of an imposter thing. It was one of those like, oh, I'm not sure I deserve this help because I'm not as bad as everybody else. You know, I feel like I'm wasting people's time if I ask for. But it was just finding the right person. And you kind of, you do 3 or 4 attempts of getting matched with people. You kind of self-match. I think about this with mentoring. Like someone says, oh, Pete, I've got a friend of mine, Carl. I think you'd really work well with him. Maybe not. You know, I think this is where people struggle with mentoring, because you have to kind of find them yourself, don't you? People that you either aspire to be like, or they have elements of characteristics that you would like to embed within your behaviors. So anyway, so I found a couple of people, and they all kind of filled my bucket up each. It was like 30% from this person, 40%, 20%. And then I gravitated most to someone that's been a long-term support mechanism for me, which I've accessed a lot actually in the last 18 months. And then, I went through that process. In terms of stopping taking drugs, kind of just went cold turkey with it, which is not a suggested option. And then I did start taking things like caffeine and nicotine, which give you a nice buzz. They're kind of nootropics. I mean, they're all drugs. This is the irony. You know, when I speak to people about drugs and they go, negative connotations, you say you're an addict, and they, in their mind, like if we played a word association game and I said to Carl, behind this curtain, there's a drug addict. Tell me what they look like. What would you say? And I know it's a hard question because you're a very respectful, considerate, self-aware man. But like, if you
we
play
all
the
have-
role of a stereotypical member of the public now, and I said, there's an addict behind this curtain, Carl, what do they look like?
Yeah, we all have inbuilt bias, and we all have, you know, that perception of what we believe to be an addict. Well, you know, you look at caffeine as an example.
Yep.
You know, when I give up coffee for a day,
Ooh.
I get a huge. Yeah, I've tried it once or twice. It's not usually before my fitness test, so my heart rate wasn't quite as high. but I'll have a banging headache by lunchtime, and then you realise that that's caffeine withdrawal, as an example, and it's a powerful drug. You know.
Yeah.
So we're all, you know, those of us that participate in tea or
Hypocrites.
coffee and need our coffees, as I do, because I'm one of them. You know, I'm a drug addict in many ways. You know, and it's and we don't realise. And I think you're right. That perception around what a drug addict is, what society's view of a drug addict is on a spectrum. Yeah. And I suppose it challenges, Pete. That can't have been easy. That must have been a tough journey. Cold turkey, not easy.
Massively hard from a relationship perspective, because then it changes your behaviours in other places. I think it did a great deal of damage to my marriage, which wasn't in a great place anyway. My ex already had her own challenges with her self-confidence and other elements like that, and that is her story to tell, not mine. And she's made a tremendous... I'm very proud of the person she is now. Not that I wasn't already, but she's a wonderful lady, great mom, great person. But like, with respect, she was also an enabler unconsciously, because she knew everything I was doing, and didn't feel comfortable enough, or didn't feel it was her place, or for many reasons, again, which would be her story to tell. She wasn't able to help me do the thing that I needed to do, because it wasn't her thing to do, it was my thing to do. And my parents had chucked me out when I was very young. They actually found needles in my room. So I left the family home when I was very young. When I was not very young, actually. You know, people very young is 11, isn't it? When I was like 17, and I went to go and live somewhere else where I could take drugs, and I rented a room somewhere else. And just had a little room with my needle boxes and my clothes and my supplements, and that was rough. So yeah, I needed to put myself around people, because also, and I think this is a great little quote we put on the fire service sometimes, no one's coming to save you, which is a harsh analogy for the fire service, because we are coming to save you. But like personal development, personal growth, the clue's in the name. You've got to do it. You have got to do it. If you explode tomorrow, I'll be quite sad. I might even cry for a bit, and then my life must go on. So I will think about you and the fond memories we've had and the work we've done together. But largely, they say a man dies twice. The time they really die, and then the last time, and the man and woman relation, works. A person dies twice. The first time they die is when they actually die. The second time is when the last time someone says your name. You know, someone sees a photo of Grandad Carl on the mantelpiece, and they go, "Oh, what was his name? You know, that's your great granddad. That is. Can't remember. I think he was in the fire service." And eventually, you'll be forgotten. But we get forgotten very quickly. And I'm sure you maybe have elements of this which you could speak to around retirement. Yeah. You know, you're gone now. You're gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who? Carl who?
Yeah, I'm sure it is. And in many ways, that's how it should be, because leaving, when if we sort of wind forward into the job that we both kind of love, and I've now left and you're still in. I think one of the great things about that job is your opportunity to make a difference while you're there, and you can make a difference in many different ways. And I think if you can be remembered fondly and respectfully and with some credibility, I think that is probably the best you can ever hope. What you don't want to do is turn the organisation into a museum of people gone past. We love the legends, we love the stories, and they will live on in folklore as time goes on. But I think there is something about allowing an organisation to kind of move on when you've made your difference and you've kept the chair warm for the next person, and it's their job to sort of take it on to the next level. And I think
it's hard to be a good person, but isn't it though, versus a great person? Because the great ones are the ones that we speak about. I remember hearing this on another podcast where they said it's easier to be a great man than a good man. It's easier to be obsessive than to be balanced. And it all depends on what you're optimizing for, doesn't it? Because like you say, you can just build a legacy. I think of people like Hemingway, great writer, terrible person. Winston Churchill, probably one of the most quoted people out there. Great leader, terrible son, terrible father. If you read any of the letters, it's quite horrific. And I think if you optimize for trying to be the greatest and all this sort of stuff, you can't. I went to see Hamilton. Have you seen Alexander Hamilton, the musical?
No.
Oh mate, it's incredible. It's running in Birmingham at the minute. I went with a girl I'm dating actually, and it was really, really lovely. Really had an incredible time. But it talks about Alexander Hamilton and what a great man he was. But within the story, there's so many really upsetting bits around his personal family and the time he didn't spend with them. We had Andy Starnes, is a thermography expert from American Fire Service, fantastic guest. Yeah. And he spoke about the affair you don't see coming. Did you remember that one, or did you hear that bit in it? Where he comes back and his wife has left him a letter, and it says about how great you are and you travel all over the world helping so many people, giving so many great talks, and we see the work you do and we're so proud of you and we admire you so much, and we're going to let you go. We're going to let you go and be the great person that you can be, because we know that's your true love. We know that is where you want to be, and those are the people that you want to be there for, and we're a burden to you, because some people like the idea of a family or the idea of a best friend or the idea of whatever, but doing it, it's very hard, isn't it? Because you can't be there for everyone else. And that's what I think, echoing back to the great person versus a good person. Like, if you do commit all of your life to the fire service, I always say the only people that will remember that you went in on the weekends and worked late is your family, is your kids. That no one's going to stand and clap for Carl on a Sunday evening when he walks out of headquarters after doing a 90-hour week. No one cares.
And it's a real balance, that you've got to get the balance right. And I think because the fire service in particular, and it will be the same for those in the police, ambulance, it's a vocation, it's a way of life. And I think what is easy to do is to almost define yourself in that role as that person. And I think to a greater or lesser degree, we all kind of do it. Our job is part of our identity. Our job is part of who we are. And I think some people can attach a great degree of importance to that kind of role, that kind, whatever position that they hold. And it doesn't leave any space for anything else. And I think the sad thing about when you do define yourself as a particular person within a particular role, and this is probably not unique to the Fire and Rescue Service, is that you leave no space for anything else. But that role won't stay forever. At one point, you will need to walk away from that organisation, and you will realise, that the investment you've made in your family, in your friends, in your relationships outside life. That's the time when it becomes really important, because it's easy to wrap yourself up in the churn of a day job and the importance of it.
Reminds me of that.
A lot of importance to it. But actually, when the music stops, when the statue's handed over, when you walk out of there, the thing that you have left is what you've created for yourself and what you've invested in, and it's friendships, it's family, it's other interests. But it's not easy either to get the balance right, and I'm not even for a minute suggesting that it is.
The team here at the podcast are extremely excited to announce our brand new partnership with Patrol Store UK. Patrol Store has been serving the UK's police, fire and emergency communities and first responder sector since 2008, providing leading brands such as Hikes, Magnum, 511, Nebo, Op Zulu, Highlander, AKU and many, many more of our favourites. They are now also supplying bespoke uniform, PPE and station workwear to fire services around the UK. So for all our listeners that are part of your USAR, your HEART team, your ISAR team, your armed response teams, your fire investigation, your NALO, your hazmat and all of the training departments that have got your own budgets, be sure to get the absolute best for your team at a realistic price by contacting Aaron and the team at Patrol Store and referencing the Firefighters podcast. Patrol Store will also be taking part in our listener competition giveaways as well as providing unique discounts to podcast listeners. So for people that are always asking about Hikes boots as an example, that is one unique discount code that is coming to you very soon through Patrol Store. We've also got some incredible bags. I mean, the Op Zulu bags are a game changer. So you know the really Gucci and expensive tactical black bags that everyone's using in CrossFit workouts and taking to the gym and taking to stations? Well, they've basically got that, but it's made better and costs less, because they're not slapping some Gucci expensive brand name on it and it's giving you what you want on a first responder salary. Be sure to keep your eyes in the notes of the episodes for links to unique offers and discount codes. And if you're looking to buy well and buy once, be sure to get in the notes and head over to Patrol Store UK. Now back to the show. Well, you'll have had to make certain sacrifices to reach the level of greatness or seniority. Do you remember the episode I shared with you from Dr. Ranjan Chatterjee's podcast with Dr. Gabor Mate and or Mate, sorry. That I've listened to that episode so many times. It's saved, downloaded, because he Gabor Mate speaks about. He said, you know, I worked too hard. He said it's okay to work hard, but to work too hard was he was a doctor, and you know he would say my patients need me. You know, Carl and his wife are pregnant. They're due any day now. I'm gonna cancel my leave actually, because then no, they don't need you. They need medical help. They need a doctor. They don't need you. What the real secret is behind this, and it's part of when we make the thing we do so much of our identity, is you need it. It doesn't need you. And I always try and remind myself of this. The fire service was here long before us, and it'll be here long after.
Yeah.
We are but a blink of a whisper of a flash of time amongst two eternal abysses of darkness. You know, everything will carry on in some capacity or another after you've gone. But trying to be that great person, and I don't mind admitting there's elements of that. You know, I wanted to see the creation of the podcast, echoing back to your original question, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do, and this is no doubt cost me loads. I always say there's no solutions, only trade-offs. But it's a really difficult thing to avoid that very long-term use of a very potent but quite toxic fuel. Things like ambition, anger, jealousy, bitterness, betrayal, justice, vengeance, moral duty. They're all very potent fuels, but long-term they're very toxic. They damage the vessel, don't they? It's like rocket fuel tanks. They've got to drop off along the way. You can't burn that hard all the way because you'll explode.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And you've got to find a way to transition into a sustainable set of fuel, because to be a great person, you might just be so driven you're ignoring everyone's, you know, I'm going to get shit done, Carl. I'm going to get this project over the line, and you know what, Sally and James just can't keep up, so they're weak, and I'm going to get this done. Well, you know, when does ambition start to become unhealthy? Do you know what I mean? It's very, very difficult. I think there's just so many overlaps there. If I were to try and lay that as a template over our current conversation, like, how did you get to? Because you must have had people. You've got to where you got to, and you didn't save the. You know, you're not the best firefighter in the world, or you didn't run the UK Fire Service, but you held a very high level of leadership in the organisation that you worked for. The fuel you used to get there, and also I will overlay this with. We all tell a nice narrative looking backwards. So, like, it's just hard because I'd need to ask your colleagues, wouldn't I? Like, what was your fuel driving you? Because most people in retrospect will say, I just wanted to do the right thing and it felt like the right thing to do. But if you were alongside that person at that moment in time, some people would have said, oh, well, Pete was just like, so driven, and it was actually a bit it's a bit, I've had feedback many times, like working with you is trying to drink from a hydrant, you know, which is actually half of a compliment, but actually a very hurtful piece of feedback. And I've had it a couple of times. Someone else said it's like trying to shake hands with a speeding train. You know, it's like, you're coming in too hot all the time, Pete. You're coming in too quick. You're coming in, it's too much. It's too much. Slow down. No one can get on the train because you're just speeding by. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And that's why I think I'm not a great leader in many ways.
Well, I think that, but being aware of it's one thing, isn't it? And there are
you can't just keep saying you're aware of it and doing nothing about it, though.
Yeah, but there's also something about way of being. You've already mentioned, you know, ADHD and being quite open about some of your, you know, challenges that you've had and you've gotten. There is something about that around your way of being is kind of how it's going to be. And I firmly believe it's that nature-nurture thing, is that you can learn different ways of doing things, but it takes an awful lot of practice, time, mental capacity to consciously do that all the time when you have a way of thinking. So if we use neurodiversity as an example, I've learned a lot about that over the past few years, and one of the things that I've kind of learned about neurodiversity is that it's a superpower in many ways, but there are also, everything has a shadow side, doesn't it? So for everything that's great, there is always a shadow side to that. And perhaps the shadow side to things like, you know, upbeat, sparky thinking, 100 miles an hour, throwing things out there, is that, you know, some other people who are a different way of being struggle to keep up with that. And there's kind of two sides to the coin, isn't it? In that for people that are neurodiverse in a social environment, as an example, maybe working really hard to work out what normal looks like. So if we use somebody with Asperger's or autism as an example, may go into a social environment and have to work really hard to, what do I do here? What are these people? What's the norm? What's the thing? And that takes an enormous amount for some people of what I would call the social battery. You know, you go into it, you know, and doing that, and that social battery has a time limit and it will run out at some point. And I think being able to sort of, if your natural way of being and your, you know, the way that you think and the way you do things is a certain way, you know, yes, you can modify that by kind of trying to work really hard at that, but that takes, and it must take, an awful lot of energy. And on the flip side as well, you know, other people may not, you know, neurodiversity, for all it's a superpower, other people won't see that, and other people won't see the mental effort that's going into. So I think the first point to make is that, you know, well, you know, it's hard. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy on both sides, is it, Pete? In terms of
problem is when you start getting rewarded for your neurodiverse way of thinking, and that perpetuates the kind of, well, that's fine, I'm just going to keep doing it this way. It's your problem, and that can be very unhealthy because perhaps there are some elements where you could benefit from softening the edges.
Yeah, I'm sure there is, but it's like everything, isn't it? It's to a greater or lesser degree. That is incredibly hard to do, and it's the, you know, yeah. I suppose it's. I'm not disagreeing with you, Pete. And I don't know what the answer is either. If I'm honest,
there isn't one. That's the beauty of it. It's okay.
But I'm probably just saying that I have an understanding of that sort of neurodiverse thing, and I think, having learnt a lot about it, it's an area of. And I think it's becoming more and more visible. I think it's becoming better understood in society. And certainly when I think about some of the work I'm doing through training, assessing incident command training, you know, I am now seeing visibly more and more delegates who have neurodiverse conditions, and understanding that as an assessor or a tutor is really important. In terms of how people may choose to learn, how people may express themselves, how their attention spans, you know, in terms of being able to focus on something for a period of time. And it's about using that to the strength and understanding that as a strength. And I can think back to people I've worked with in the Fire and Rescue Service over the last 31 years that have presented in a certain way. And it's not until later in their careers that we've realised, because neurodiversity is better understood, is more understood, we understand it more now, that those people have had some fairly significant needs, additional needs and additional support needs. And actually when those needs have been met,
flourish.
Things have gone, they've literally, I can think of one firefighter who presented a certain way, and to some people that might have been difficult, in terms of being able to manage that individual and so on and so forth. A great firefighter in many ways. When we found out that person had a neurodiverse condition, we put the adjustments in. It was the change was unbelievable, and that's and I think
the final combination in the lock.
Absolutely, it is, and I think it's about finding your place, isn't it? It's about finding a place where you can operate with people that understand you.
Yeah.
And I don't mean you as you, Pete, but people that understand your surroundings.
Go where you're celebrated. Yeah. And accepted.
And people understand, and I don't think there's anything wrong in saying. And I've had some real respect for people when I did a lot of work through sort of EDI and staff networks and bits and pieces like that. And the lead for the neurodiverse staff network, who was in the police actually, funnily enough, would introduce himself and say, I am neurodiverse, I have autism, I might struggle too. And I thought, wow, that is quite a courageous thing to do. But it really helped, because expressing your needs out front and saying to people, look, I might have, I might come at you with this, and don't duck, will you? Because I'm just out, and tell me, And sometimes it's about other people kind of giving you that barometer.
We used to have user guides in an old company that I worked for. You'd have a user guide as part of your profile on your Outlook.
Yeah.
And it would say things you preferred, times of days you like to work, little nuances around, like, how you would perform in a meeting, if you came on a call, you do or don't like your video on. There was lots of little things, and it was a user guide for that person, and I loved it. It was great, because then it doesn't forgive obscene behavior or anything like that, but it was just like little things that maybe you might not like, or is not the way that you would prefer to do it. Like, I never have my video on a call, or whatever, or I don't answer emails before 10 a.m, or I like meetings where I get an agenda ahead of time. Do you know what I mean? Little things like that. When asked a question, I enjoy a break afterwards to pause for thought, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And it's you can't please everyone all the time, of course, but I loved it, and I thought that was really good. And I think something like that, similar. I mean, we do have neurodiversity passports, don't we, in certain brigades and services and things like that. Not really entirely the same thing, but everyone has a neurodiversity.
Oh, absolutely. We all have one. I think even things like, and I'm really encouraged to sort of see more and more organisations doing this now, is because it benefits everybody. Is, for example, interview questions. So is an interview a question? Is it a matter of catching you out? Is it a matter of sort of throwing something at you and seeing how you deal with it? Or is there some merit in giving you the interview questions half an hour before the interview? And I'm a firm believer that there should be no stress test here for it. And giving people the interview questions half an hour before an interview, I think, is a wonderful thing for all candidates, because ultimately you're going to get the best out of the candidate. You're going to give them time to compose themselves. But in particular, those with neurodiverse conditions, that may be a real help to them, because that thing around throwing something at somebody, giving them time to think about it, in an interview is not necessarily the best. And I just wonder in the past how many neurodiverse candidates who would have been absolutely fantastic we've lost along the way, because we haven't at least thought of that they may not flourish best in that environment. And that's just one example for me where I think a lot of organisations are now realising.
I much prefer role playing though. And that's because I have a real big frustration with interviews, massive frustration. Sometimes it's just, and I get maybe the level of seniority you need to have some genuine framework that people need to align to. But I'm like, some people just memorise a script.
Yeah.
It's rubbish. It's absolute BS, some of it. I much prefer longer term profile work of, 360 feedback, regular times during a year, and then some role play stuff, having people lead on projects or do something like that. And I appreciate that's also a luxury of the size of an organization. Like, again, echoing back to the private sector, when I've done work there, people giving you specific things to do because that company has the luxury of space and dropping you into this team for 8 months to try and achieve an objective or something like that. Because you can just lie to me. Just sit there and lie. You know, I'm not allowed to say you're lying in this interview because you're telling me something and it is what it is. If I tell you, I mean, I'm not going to tell you that I've, created a new fire engine for the service because that's clearly going to be a lie. But I could manipulate some really difficult conversation that I tell you I had. Probably never had it.
I think there's always a challenge, isn't there, with any interview process.
You said it, didn't you? You were the best one. You were like, repeat what you the best interview quote. You attributed it to someone else. I can't remember. But what's an interview most of the time?
It's two people sat on opposite sides of the table, desperately hoping that neither finds the other one out.
Yeah, I just like, God, that's just great.
I forgot about that. Cheers, thanks,
mate. I remember you say a lot of things on private conversations where I'm like, oh God, I love that, and I always think about it after we've finished talking. I reflect on it. I'm like, yeah, that's a real good way of putting it.
Pete, here's one. What's the best piece of advice, or what's the piece of advice that you wish somebody had given you 10 years ago?
Focus on your own happiness more. Happiness is an inside job. No one else. Like I say, Carl made me feel happy today. No, he didn't. Impossible. Carl can't make me happy. Carl, all the things in your sphere of control are your thoughts and your actions, your words. If they tick the right mental boxes for me, if they switch on the right lights that meet my blueprint of happiness, then I will give myself happiness. My mind will open up the gate to give me the feeling of happiness. Because I always use relationships as an example. Like, I want Carl to feel loved. Me and Carl are in a relationship. I want you to feel loved. Okay, so I'm going to hold your hand. I'm going to kiss you lots in public. I'm going to send you messages saying I love you every 2 hours. Because that's how I receive love. Maybe. That's not how I receive love, but maybe. That might make you feel smothered. Do you know what I mean? So I can't make you feel loved. I can't make you feel happy. I can just be who I am. And if that makes you happy, great. And again, there's adaptations, and relationships are always a bit of compromise. But for me, most of the time, and even now at times, I do too many things that don't make me happy, and I'm doing them for someone else. And I often never get thanked for it. That sounds a bit bitter, doesn't it? But yeah, you can set yourself on fire trying to keep everyone else warm. And I did that for a bit too long in many different ways. So, sounds selfish, and I think we give selfish a bad rap, bad press. Healthy selfishness, like you working with the podcast, you've got a really great long-term mindset, and you've got some really good strategic stuff that you'd help and do with the podcast. And because I've said it, I want us to be here for a very long time. I want us to be around in the sector and be all this good stuff and all this jazz and be a safe place for people to have discussions. You help slow that down, and what does that practically look like, and give a lot of advice and guidance and stuff like that. But you also make a lot of time for yourself and your family, which you should do, and I should do more of. And I should do more things that make me happy. But work is a very, very useful distraction, isn't it? It's a very, it's very, very useful.
Do you know what?
So yeah, focus on making yourself happier.
You've said something there, and it's an interesting word, and I'm going to pick up on it because I'm working hard on this at the moment myself. Okay. Is should. So I'm personally, this is a little personal challenge for me, and I don't mind sharing it, is I'm trying to banish should from my vocabulary because it's a really judgmental word. So you go out on a night out with your friends and you maybe have one more than you should have done. You wake up in the morning, you think, I should have drunk less last night. What I'm trying to say, I don't do this all the time, by the way, but what I'm trying to say to myself is, well, I could have drunk less, but you know what? I was having a great time and we enjoyed ourselves. And you know what? it's the price you got to pay. But next time I'm maybe just going to apply that to, I should have done this, I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't have done the other. And I'm trying to replace the should with the could. And it's amazing how often you use the word should in your own internal narrative, because it's a really hard word on yourself. And what I've been trying to do, and I wondered if you'd have a view on this, Pete, is replace the should for the could and see what it does for your internal narrative.
I have stemmed my interrupting muscle well there. I'm proud of myself, because when I was going through my addiction, I went to a big Tony Robbins seminar called Unleash the Power Within. Some people may have done this. It's quite expensive. You go and do it for a weekend. It's about £1,000. And he does a bit in that about you should all over yourself. I should eat a bit less. I should save a bit more money. I should spend more time with my family. I should. And you just should all over yourself. And it is, as you've articulated well there, it's very self-deprecating, comes with an implication of guilt, regret perhaps. It's a very, very hard word. And there's another little pivot that I heard around get to versus got to. And it often reminds me of a friend whose mum was in hospital for a very long time on life support. And every Friday, he had to go and see her. Like, I've got to go and see my mum on Friday. I've got to go and spend some time with her at the hospital. I've got to. And then she died, because that's what happens usually, isn't it? And then it was, what are you doing on Friday, mate? It was like, I've got to, I don't know actually what I'm doing on Friday. I wish I would get to go and see my mum. Like, I've got to garden. I've got to cut the grass. You mean you get to cut the grass, Pete? And I think it's a gratitude switch, isn't it? How many people live in central London with no garden? They get to go. That's the thing. I get to see my friends today. I get to go for a run today because I can walk. Yeah. I get to go to work today because I have a job that I actually quite enjoy. I get to see my daughter today because she doesn't hate me. Get to versus got to. It's about
perspective, isn't it? And it's about the lens, and the word you use there, gratitude, is a powerful, powerful word. Being grateful for having your health, being able to walk, being able to do the things that we all take for granted, and living your life with a degree of gratitude instead of looking for the things that aren't so good. And it's not always easy, because people have struggles, and people,
comparison's a thief of joy. Carl's got a bigger house than me. He's got nicer things.
What is success? What does good look like? And I think I did. My late dad, my late father, would often say, I'd ask him, Dad, what would you, if you had 3 wishes, what would you have? And he would just say health, wealth, and happiness. And I'll always come back to that as a simple formula for, if you were to take any one of those away, and any one of those could we never know when the time's going to run out for your health running out, your wealth running out, your happiness running out. And if you were to take time away from you, your health away from you, and there are many, many people that sadly live with some long-term conditions that just have a huge impact on their life. We touch wood, as we sit here today, this is what we've got, this is all we have, and worrying about what happened or worrying about what might happen again sort of robs you of joy. And it comes back to that thing around what advice would you want to take 10 years ago. Well, for me, it's like worry less. Because it kind of robs you, it robs you joy. And I think when you're bringing a family up, when you're working your way through a career, when you're facing life's challenges, there is always a tendency to worry.
I've lived a life of many challenges, most of which never happened.
Yeah.
Ever heard the quote that true leaders are readers? Well, we believe this is true. Listeners often ask where we go to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the sector globally. So there are a few key publications which I encourage you to go check out. Now, if you're looking for insights on disaster management, fire protection and firefighting, for us, we go to Asia Pacific Fire Magazine. And when you're looking for the latest on the Middle East fire protection industry and fire services, it's Gulf Fire Magazine. And our quarterly check-in is with International Firefighter Magazine, reporting to municipal, industrial and fire training professionals. Now, next up, I'm widely accepted to be the global voice for passive and active fire protection. This is a good one. It's International Fire Protection Magazine. And finally, and perhaps the most relevant to our predominantly UK audience, I'd strongly suggest subscribing to UK Fire Magazine, reporting to the United Kingdom fire protection industry and fire services. We're really excited to announce that after a long-standing relationship and mutual respect, we've now partnered with MDM Publishing, who bring you all of these essential publications. Because in a world of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. Eric Hoffer said that, and I believe he was right. So keep growing, keep learning, and keep yourself in the know and at the cutting edge of what's happening globally by dropping into the notes. And as a gift from the podcast, you can actually subscribe to any of these publications for free using the link in our notes. Now back to the show. It's the difference between position and disposition, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like trying to change your position to get happiness as though it's something that's beyond. When I get the promotion, when I, get the next goal, when the podcast hits 1 million listeners, when you position happiness as something in the distance, you've already achieved many of the things you said would make you happy, and you're not happy. So changing your disposition, your feeling about where you are right now, try and be where your feet are. That's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
Try and be right here, right now.
Be present.
Be present. That's why I enjoy conversations. Come back to why did the podcast start? Having an immersive conversation with someone forces you to be present. I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not doing whatever. There's a pressure to this situation. We're recording this conversation. I want to be present, and I am being present. And that forces you to pay attention to the small things and to really have valuable conversation. I think that's why we're losing the art of conversation, because so many of us struggle to be present. So that was another reason that I wanted to start it. And it's a reason why I enjoy doing ice baths, or I enjoy doing a hard workout. I always say people talk about peace of mind. They don't want peace of mind, they want peace from mind, because the mind, and anxiety being a big part of a lot of people's mental blueprint, anxiety is protecting you for the future, and you can't stop it. It's always problem solving. It's problem solving for everything that might happen in a minute, but it's not happening now. And only if you're fully present, like when you're in an ice bath, you ain't thinking about anything else. You can't. It's just consumed all of your mental space of this thing that you're in. Same with a hard workout or a hard run, or a very emotional conversation with someone.
Yeah.
I haven't got cognitive space for anything else right now. This is all I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that forces you, that drags all of you into the present. And that was another reason why, so through the recovery and stuff, I was listening to a lot of audiobooks, a lot of podcasts, found it so immersive and so valuable. And I started having really deep conversations with those people around me. Rebuilt the relationship with my parents, rebuilt a lot of relationships with friends and things like that. And you just get into a habit. I really struggle with mediocre, shallow conversations, because I've been conditioned to having very deep conversations with people, very long-form, deep conversations. And then I suppose the third, just to echo back and close the loop on that first question an hour ago, is I didn't see anyone doing it for the fire and rescue service. Too busy trying to be professional. Too busy trying to value preach to all this governance, which is extraordinarily important. But the fire service is just a name. The badge is nothing really without the people behind it. People are our greatest asset, but we don't talk about them and celebrate them enough, in my personal opinion. And everyone says that some of the greatest stuff they've learned, and they'll always tell you a story of a person, or they'll tell you a story of an incident, which is also a story of people. People are the thing. It's people. There's amazing people. Paramedics, police officers, firefighters, doctors, care assistants, teachers. All of these people, they're not getting massive amounts of money. Who's celebrating them? Who's rewarding them? I echo back, I had a conversation again recently about our good friend, chief fire officer that took his own life, and I wasn't as close to him as many other people, but I get so upset when I think about it. I get so upset. Who was helping them? Who was helping them? No one. Someone was. Maybe they thought they were doing enough, maybe they weren't. And this person's not unique, unfortunately.
There's many other examples of it, and hopefully lots of people can't relate to this, but I'm sure some can. No one cared. Obviously they did, but not enough. We couldn't cross the void. We reached as far as we could, and they reached back, or they didn't reach far enough, and we couldn't catch them. We couldn't catch them, and they just fell. And yeah, I just think of all the people, all the first responders that are falling. They're all falling. You know, they're not important enough. They don't get paid enough. They've not got a high enough economical status to access the help that perhaps they need. And then one day they'll retire, or they'll leave through poor ill health, physical, mental, whatever. We say we care. It's hard to care. It takes a lot of focus and energy to care.
It does.
I think. Don't just say it like, oh yeah, I'm a really caring person. Words. Doing it's really hard, isn't it? And recognizing when you see someone that needs it, and have I got time? Can I make time? Is my desire big enough to help them? Maybe someone else is helping them. I'm sure they are. There's a whole department for that. Okay. I'd rather ask and them go, actually, Pete, really appreciate it. I'm speaking to Carl later today. He's sort of supporting me. And amazing. Here if you want to chat. Is it all right if I give you a call in 2 weeks, just touch base, or maybe I'll message you or email you? What's the best way to reach back if I want to reach back? You know, I put dates in my diary of fatal incidents that I've been to, and I send emails unless I see them beforehand. I make a note in the diary, and then in the notes of the calendar insert. And people might think, well, this is, you don't really care, Pete. Otherwise, if you really cared, you wouldn't have to make a note about it. Okay, my brain doesn't remember things well enough. And like every 6 months, I repeat it 3 times. You know, you could put the repeat function on a calendar insert. I repeat function 3 times on 6-month inserts. And it prompts me to send an email. And I'm not inherently just asking them how they are. I'll just share a recollection and just say, wonder if you ever thought about it. You know, if you do, if you want to catch up about it. Sometimes I think about it. Hope you're doing well. Miss you. Really appreciate you. Whatever. Probably, I don't know. Sometimes I've had some remarkable conversations off the back of it, out of the blue. Most of the time you get nothing back. That's okay. I'd rather get nothing back than worry that the next Wayne Brown is falling. Yeah.
And I think, you know, we talked about that when we did the podcast, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
And I share your sadness. You know, he's a great man. And I think having dealt with, unfortunately, you know, colleagues, friends who have taken their own life along the way, the first question you ever ask yourself is, why didn't they say anything? Why didn't they tell us? Why could I have seen it? You know, it's that I should have been able to spot that. And I think, you know, when I sort of reflect back on some of those conversations that I've had with myself and others, it's a natural response to losing a very traumatic event, to losing a loved one and a friend. And naturally, we want to be there, because one of the things I did some sort of deep psychology on groups and leaderships, etc., and talked about this with a counsellor and a therapist who was really good in this field, and she introduced me to something called the Kaufman drama triangle. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, and it talks about, for any sort of conflict, drama, workplace scenario, situation, you need 3 things to be present. And the first one was a persecutor, which is, you know, it sounds harsh, but it's somebody that will cause that angst, that give that stress out, will be the person that gives all the grief or causes the situation or the problem or the bully or whatever it is. It could be high level, low level. You then need a victim, which is somebody that will be subject to that, and it could be a group, it could be. But then there's also going to be a rescuer in there. And if you think back to how we as firefighters learn stuff, we learned the triangle of fire, didn't we? And it's, you know, but then this is probably why it stuck with me. So you need persecutor, rescuer, and victim. And she talked through this whole thing around some of these scenarios and situations that said, look, think about, in any given situation, who the persecutor is, who the rescuer is, and who the victim is. And it's fascinating that in many cases, we have the Fire and Rescue Service has a lot of people who are rescuers. And we want to make things better. We want to save some. We want to, stop the situation from getting worse. We want to be the people that will turn up. That's how we train, isn't it? We train to be, we'll turn up, we'll pitch up, we'll fix it. And I think the saddest part of the realization for particularly when we lose a loved one or a friend is that we haven't been able to be the rescuer, and we haven't been able to, but interestingly, there's a lot of rescuers in the Fire and Rescue Service. Because it does attract that type of person. And when you look at any sort of situation and maybe moving away from, the tragedy of people taking their own lives, if you to look at any workplace situation, generally speaking, you have to have three things to exist. And you have to have somebody, and let's be honest, when we talk about people who allow themselves to be victims of some of this stuff and will put themselves in, and there's the guy, a sumo guy. Have you heard of the sumo guy? I have to Google him now. I can't remember what his name. Paul McGee, I think his name is. He's done a book called Sumo, and it stands for Shut Up, Move On. And he talks a lot about, and I've seen him talk. He talks a lot about the victim T-shirt and how often do you, and we all do it at some point, put the victim T-shirt on and we're happy to be the victim. But when you think about, then you sort of, well, actually, are you ever the persecutor? Are you ever the one that sort of puts that pressure on, gives the heat? But then look out for when you're being the rescuer, because that does also take a lot of your mental capacity and time, and you can find yourself in any situation if you think about it. And maybe, going forward, thinking maybe listeners might want to Google it, look it up. It's a fascinating...
I'll put a link in for it. I've just told links, so I'm trying as best I can to pull links as we're having these discussions. So the Cartman Triangle, I'm definitely going to put that one in there, because that's great.
It's a really interesting sort of theory.
Sometimes you're not allowed to be the victim, though. I remember hearing a story around that where a woman petrified of heights going on a cable car, and she gets on the cable car. It's taken ages to convince her to do it. She's there with her 16-year-old son, and he's convinced mummy to go on this cable car, and she's petrified, and it's a big thing, and she gets on it. And when she gets on it, there's another mum on there with their 9-year-old daughter, and the 9-year-old daughter is really petrified of heights. And within this cabin of 4 people, someone's already taken the victim slot. The victim slot is no longer available to you, so you must become a rescuer. And I think about this with parents. I'm petrified of spiders. Okay, but there's a spider in my daughter's room and she's really petrified. So now, your fear trumps my fear. Because fear is almost all-consuming, and the opposite of fear we perceive as bravery, isn't it? But bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the realization there's something more important at stake.
Yeah.
I'm not scared of heights. When I'm at the top of the aerial ladder platform and it's swinging in the wind, I wouldn't say I'm scared of heights, but I'm very aware of the fact that if I fall from here, I'm going to die. So I'm certainly nervous. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that element that I'm here to do a job, I'm here to do a thing. Going into BA never really scares me anymore, but rope access sometimes scares me.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone's clipped on. Pete, you're going over, and in the role I do now, I never go over anymore, really, unless I'm doing an ISAR thing. But even when you're about to go over, you're like, just check that carabiner one more time, because you look like you're fiddling about with something. I'm not. Can someone else just check what Carl's done there? Because has he really locked that off? Do you know what I mean? And it's like, what, are you scared? Or I'm not scared. I'm just very aware that if you haven't done that right, I can't switch gravity off. I'm going to fall here.
There's some really funny clips doing the rounds on the social medias at sometimes. There must be a ride somewhere that people drop, and the attendant sort of sits there and he's talking to them, and he says, he's clearly, they're all set up and all safe and lovely, and he says, oh, you haven't got your seatbelts on. I'll just come round. And as he comes round, he presses the button for them to go. They just disappear off, psychology, and that is.
I love that.
Just makes the ride a bit more terrifying.
I still do it to my drivers. When you pull up to a 45-degree junction and you're in the IC seat and you have to look left for them.
Yeah.
And they're like, is it clear left? And you're like, yeah, it's clear. And then as they start to pull forward, you go, after this lorry. And they're like, what? Yeah.
If you're quick.
Yeah. Right.
Love
Should we
it.
pause for a second? I'm going to have a wee and fill up my coffee. Are you okay on time?
I'm good, mate. Yeah. I'll just I'll nip and get a brew, and I'll
Go
I'll
do
do
that.
the
I'll see you in
same.
a second.
If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drill Book. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading on to Drill Book, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, knots and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters, so you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show.
So, Pete, one of the things that we said we'd talk about was doing the now and next, really. And I know that you've got some interesting guests lined up on the podcast coming up over the next month. And it's been an interesting month from a sort of fire and rescue point of view. There's been a lot happening.
Loads going on, isn't there?
Yeah, what's the things that you've picked up on this month then?
So one thing I was really excited about, because I've spent a bit of time assessing down in Merseyside and I've got a lot of friends there. And obviously we just came back from Liverpool where we had the British Firefighter Challenge. And, we've had Dan Stevens on a number of times. I like Merseyside. It's a good service in my opinion. I'm sure they're not perfect. They do a lot of things wrong. But they've just had the official opening of their National Resilience Centre of Excellence, haven't they? Which I think is going to be awesome. So I'm doing a read now. They did some stuff on it from the NFCC. So the UK's most technologically advanced emergency services training site, the National Resilience Centre of Excellence, was officially opened on Thursday, the 19th of July, by the Home Office Minister, the Dame Diana Johnson. I know what, I want to get her on the podcast, actually. I need to find a way in, mate. We need to find a way in to have her on. So that's in Aintree, Liverpool. Put her on your list, because that's probably in your sphere to try and...
list.
I'm sure you know someone that knows someone that knows someone. I just think she'd be an interesting lady in a conversation around government. I don't know how open she'd be able to be. But anyway, she was there. She did the state-of-the-art opening for the facility, Merseyside's rescue. I forget how this was paid for, because National Resilience have paid for a lot of it. And Merseyside have got... Look, obviously, they've always hosted, supported the National Resiliency Framework, so they've benefited from having this big injection of money. It says the centre includes an array of immersive and realistic training environments, such as a 6-storey high-rise building, a row of terraced houses, a motorway setting, specialist vehicle garages, a high-volume pump training area. It also includes rubble pile for search and rescue exercises and a suite of practical training classrooms. A purpose-built command and control suite enhances the training capabilities, allowing the simulation of incidents ranging from small-scale emergencies to major multi-incidents. Sounds like they've gone a bigger and better version of a few places, but like Cheshire's got a great little setup with their row of terrace houses, and they've got a motorway as well. Have you been to the new site in Merseyside?
I'm not, no, but as you were talking, as I did see it being launched. I think it's a fantastic facility. I can remember when the sort of New Dimensions project kicked off, and I went down to the Fire Service College to see their training centre down there, the USAR setup that they had down there. And I think as time's gone on, I think Fire and Rescue Services have developed their own training. But certainly with Merseyside having the National Resilience reference, it looks like a fantastic facility.
Amazing,
and I don't think there's any substitute for training in those sorts of environments. And of course, the National Resilience is kind of one side to it. The other side is, of course, crews will benefit from using those facilities as well. So I think it's a fantastic facility. I think it's a real flagship, and I think it puts National Resilience back on the map in many ways, because it's the unseen. There's a lot of work goes on with National Resilience behind the scenes, day in, day out. And if we think about the current disorder that we're seeing across the country, widespread disorder, I'm fairly certain that National Resilience will be playing a huge part in making sure that fire and rescue services are ready to respond across the piece. And of course, all that goes unseen. But of course, Merseyside and other fire and rescue services play a significant part in making sure that that national resilience piece, because it is what it is ready. And of course, the fire and rescue service will have a lot to offer in terms of supporting UK PLC in through the current difficulties. So I think
who do you think's the best one out there at the minute? Who do you think's got the best training centre? Because I think it's between them and Manchester. You know.
Do you know? I wouldn't want to call it. I haven't seen them. I haven't been around them, so I don't think I could make an educated kind of guess.
I'm going to reach out to Phil. So I had a good catch up with Phil Garrigan at the British, and I'm going to drop him a message, and I'm going to try and get down there. I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to leave this in the recording to call out Phil and say, Phil, give us an invite. Me, Sarah, Carl, let's come down to Merseyside. Let's have a walk round. Let's do a podcast. Let's talk about all the great stuff going on at Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service, because it looks like a wonderful thing. And Phil's a proper nice bloke. He actually did a run at the British Firefighter Challenge. Bless him. Such a good egg.
Good guy, Phil.
He's a nice guy. So yeah, that was one of the first things on mine. What have you seen, brother?
Well, this week I think again it's been a difficult sort of month for the Fire and Rescue Service in terms of the misconduct issues that are sort of rattling on, and the HMI published their report this week. Again, sort of reading the headlines, progress being made across the sector, and I think the sector's becoming more and more focused on that sort of misconduct and values and behaviours. And again, there's a long way to go with it, isn't there, in terms of that overall improvement journey. But I think I was pleased to see the HMI recognise that in the report, and I think their job is clearly to sort of identify those areas of improvement and effectively hold the sector to account sort of moving forward. And I think what would be fantastic to see over the next year or two is to see that conversation around misconduct, values and behaviours kind of disappear, because I think the issues are being dealt with. But clearly, like any sector, like any organisations, it's about people. It's about how people kind of choose to behave when they come to work. I think
there'll be two sides of that conversation I'm really looking forward to. One is Roy. So we're going to have Roy back on, or it seems like we're going to. Had a reach out from the HMI the other day about Roy coming on the podcast to talk about that report, so that should be interesting. But then also Helen Moore. Do you know who Helen is? Helen is the young lady, lawyer, prosecutor. I'm going to get her title wrong, so I'm not even going to pretend to get it. But anyway, she defended young lady Sasha, who had a big high-profile case, and she's had a couple of other large high-profile cases in the Fire and Rescue Service. Helen's carved a bit of a niche out for herself as someone who does a great job of bringing misjustices to justice, if you will, around the way that we handle misconduct, the way that our HR and personnel departments try to do their best to treat everybody fairly and all that sort of jazz. But then when it all does go wrong and the dominoes fall, it tends to be somebody like Helen that gets involved to defend the person that's been treated unfairly, or not, everything's not been done as it should have been. She's coming on. Should be a great conversation, because again, it's someone outside the sector to shine a light on maybe the common mistakes that we do. I think of them like debriefs, like something went wrong early on in the incident and it was a cascade effect from there. Like, I think about this now, when something happens on a fire station or wherever, the early interventions of the manager and what they do and don't do and how they do and don't handle it can be the beginning thread of the whole blanket unraveling. Do you know what I mean? You've got to make sure, when do I need to hit the big red button? When does this become more than I can handle? I think that's what we need to try and help people with as well. Not hitting the big red button all the time for no reason, because a lot of things can be mediated and dealt with, and having, attentive, open, safe conversations with an element of psychological safety, and just building good rapport with people. But that can't justify everything. There's some things where the big red button has to be hit early, and recognizing what is something you can handle as a team, as a manager, as a leader, as an organization, and when does it become something bigger than that. So maybe that's something Roy and Helen collectively. I don't know if we'd have them on together, actually. I don't think I would. I think it'd be disrespectful to either person. I wouldn't want to pose it as like a argument or a debate, and that's not what either of them would be up for. And it's not really our style, is it? But no, interesting people. So yeah, that would be a good one.
Look forward to that one. And Pete, you mentioned the Firefighter Challenge, and I guess you wouldn't kind of celebrate yours and Sarah's successes, but I can mention it. So you both attended, and you both presented as well. I understand the Firefighters podcast was there. Tell us all about it, and also don't be shy in your achievements or Sarah's either, because I think you both did really well.
We both did fantastically well. Sarah, I'm immensely proud of. She stepped up doing a proper hosting job this time. Not that she didn't do before, but she stepped in at the Welsh to help out in the hosting role. She's very fun, articulate, gregarious, very likeable. She's very confident. She's a good speaker. She engages with the crowd so well. And it was great to have her there. She stepped in and transitioned out for me and Kev Ruan, who also helps hosting it. So she was absolutely fantastic. This was her first big time competing at the British as well. Put in a fantastic time. In the Welsh Firefighter Challenge, she struggled with the casualty, had to pick up a few times. This time she nailed it all the way through, completed the course in a very respectful time, and took a medal for the... I apologise, Sarah, I might forget for a second. I believe in the relays, they got a medal, which I still actually need to send to her because she had a long way to travel and she had to leave a little bit early, so I accepted it on her behalf. I need to get it out to her. My fault, Sarah. You'll have it by the time this comes out, I promise. And then, with regard to myself, I hosted as I always do. Love celebrating the athletes. I think it's such a shame when you have any kind of occasion and there's not a good, not saying that I am, but like for myself and Kev and Sarah, if you've not got good hosts that can announce and celebrate the athletes and the partners and recognise the families that are there and that big collective fire and rescue service family that brings it all together. So I was doing the hosting thing. At some point I need to commit to either doing the hosting or doing the competing, because I also competed again this year. I won gold at the Welsh, and this year I got silver at the British. So I got a gold in my age category, and I was second overall to Matt Adams, fantastic athlete. Beat me by 1 second. You should see the final finish. It was a fantastic race. Both set course records. He's a lot younger than me and clearly the better athlete. I've had him on the podcast actually. Wonderful guy. But yeah, for me, I'm like, I probably need to commit to just hosting at some point, because I feel like I walk around with a microphone for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and then I'm like, right, now I need to go and compete, and everyone else has been sat in lawn chairs all morning like a proper athlete, chilling themselves out, doing a long warm-up, having lots of water and electrolytes or whatever, and then I'm like,
good idea.
God, I've got to go and get ready.
Absolutely. So let's see if we can lighten the load a bit next year, Pete. But I have to say, congratulations to everybody that took part, and yourselves as well. I think it's a phenomenal. It must have been warm. It looked warm, and I looked at the clips.
It was nice. It was really, really good. What else is happening out there? One thing that people obviously will be aware of, brother, is all the civil unrest that's happening. And a few people in my personal circles have said, what do the fire service do about all this sort of stuff? Now, we're not going to go into the depths of the why and the how and the unhappy parties that seem to be causing a lot of public disorder at the minute, but give people maybe a wide angle lens of when this sort of stuff happens, because fire and rescue service do unfortunately get attacked sometimes. Obviously the police get attacked a lot, and they certainly don't deserve it. They're there to do a job. Paramedics and things like that get attacked a lot just in general day-to-day life, unfortunately, in their work. I mean, not in their personal life. And the fire service, we sometimes, we get things thrown at us, we get fireworks shot at us. When you've seen things like this happen in the past, what sort of briefing do we play in this sort of thing? How do we support the community and maybe cast a bit of a light on what fire and rescue services might be experiencing at the minute?
Yeah, I think again it comes back to there's an awful lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to prepare for these sorts of eventualities. And I think if I cast myself back to my last fire and rescue service I worked in, sadly, even during business as usual, it was not uncommon in certain areas to have firefighters attacked and appliances damaged on a weekly basis. It was just seemed to be some of the problems in those areas that people would do that. And I think when you then start to escalate that, it then starts to become a significant problem. So I think the first thing is, the machinery that kicks in behind the scenes with both police, the emergency planning, local authorities, ambulance, fire plays a significant part in that, because clearly, as we've seen, that these thugs, and I'm going to use, I just can't think of any other word, these thugs will use any means, and fire being a weapon. We've seen wheelie bins set on fire, cars, hotels, buildings, and that poses a real threat and a real risk to people and to life. And I think the planning that goes on behind that, and at sort of the high level, you will have the strategic coordination groups in every sort of local authority area, fire and rescue area, that will be all the main players around the table. So you'll have your local authority, you will have your health, you will have police, you will have fire, and you will have the whole raft of people that can do something to kind of influence and try and respond to that level of violence. It sits below that will be the tactical coordination group, which again, similar group of people, but they're more sort of looking at the day-to-day operations of how it's going to work. And above that, and we've seen that this week, is that the COBRA, the Cabinet Office Briefing Room A, which is the one that government will put in place for these types of emergencies, have sat, and each strategic coordination group chair in each local authority area will feed into the COBRA arrangements. So there's a lot of work will be going on daily, hourly, and I'm sure that colleagues in the Fire and Rescue Service have been consumed, I would imagine, by this level of preparedness. And again, it's about pre-planning, your hotspot areas, using your information and intelligence in conjunction with the police around what are your likely hotspot areas, what do the police know. And it's about then, so if the Fire and Rescue Service gets called to respond, the first thing is, are we going to respond? If it's a bin or a vehicle in the open, it may be too dangerous to send crews into there, or the level of protection that they will need, based on the risk. It's fair to say that Fire and Rescue Services will always respond when there is a life or property at risk, and then the measures will be put in place to protect the crews. But of course, firefighters don't have any powers of restraint.
Nope.
In terms of being able to...
I always have to remind myself of that when I'm at jobs, because I was at one recently where someone had set a big fire in their back garden, and the neighbour next door had a really lovely house, and they were getting quite irate, and they started engaging in some fisticuffs, and we helped out. Not beating the other person, helped out, stepping in, trying to mediate and trying to keep people apart and stuff like this. Requested the attendance of the police, but they were going to be a little while. And I always have to stop myself and go, A, this is not my job. B, if a member of my crew gets hurt, how do I justify my actions? And C, every other incident commander in the organisation that I work for is not a 6'4", 18-stone male. So would I expect this very same thing from everyone else? No, I wouldn't, because it's not part of my job. But you do have that battle, or I certainly do, just saying from my own perspectives. It's tough, isn't it? Because you're in those moments and you feel an obligation to help, and you see a misjustice taking place, and it's tough, isn't it?
It is, and it's something I always used to say at crews is, you will always go and do what you've got to do, but you also have a right to be able to defend yourself and your crew if you are attacked. There's no, the crews are not there to be abused, thrown, objects thrown at, threatened, because it also has a psychological impact on crews as well. It can be quite intimidating to see gangs of people, youths, not necessarily youths, but gangs of people who are behaving in a threatening manner, balaclavas on, hoods up, carrying weapons, fireworks, flares. It's and you're outnumbered, and I think the psychological impact on crews is huge, and I think that looking at the level of disorder that some areas have seen,
scary.
Again, we're not going to comment on it, Pete.
No.
Other than to say it's mindless thuggery, and absolutely, do not.
Don't engage.
It's difficult to find the words. However,
we'll be given a rendezvous point by the police. We go there, and if anything happens, we'll go in and help. But
and
just
you know
put the
what?
fires out.
Every member of that crew, for every response, will always want to do the best to support the police colleagues or ambulance colleagues themselves.
Yeah.
And I think we can only say, I suppose, our sort of thoughts are with all responders, in terms of the job that they are doing, and not forgetting really the very, very tragic incident that seems to have been the catalyst for this in Southport. And we know that crews colleagues from Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service attended that very, very tragic incident that's deeply saddened myself and and the nation. And I think we just can't not talk about it without just sort of remembering that and remembering the tragedy and
all the stuff that happens. I always say it's not your fault. It's not your fault that it happened.
Family, and friends and everybody. Just an awful. And of course, that very tragic incident happened during the firefighter challenge, I think. And again, it just shows you the seriousness sometimes of the level of tragedy that our colleagues are faced with on a daily basis. But we'll always go to make the difference.
Always, yeah. But again, don't set yourself on fire to keep everyone warm. It's not our fault that these things are happening. We'll do what we can with the resources we've got, with the training and the best of intentions, but we're not going to put ourselves and our colleagues, and certainly not the public, at unnecessary risk to try and bring something to a swift conclusion. We can only do what we can do.
So next time we speak, and let's hope, when we speak about next month and our sort of catch up, let's hope that this is a distant memory. And one thing I was going to sort of suggest, Pete, and again, we do have a presence across all the social media kind of outlets, is that listeners have always got the ability to drop us a line either on X, Instagram or LinkedIn if there's anything, any questions I want to ask, any subjects I want to cover. And it doesn't necessarily have to be linked into, the podcast. Anything will do. And I think let's throw the challenge out to podcast listeners to give us some kind of, throw us a question, a question for Pete, a question for me. I don't mind questions at all. I wonder if people can do that. And very often we get feedback through the social media channels, which is great. And we always appreciate listeners taking the time to do that.
A lot of the time it's always just keep doing what you're doing. We love it. And I'm like, that doesn't help. It's very nice. We appreciate it. But we're not running out of ideas by any stretch of the imagination. I used to think this was a niche within a niche. Yeah, but you want to ask a question.
What do you want us to talk about?
We're stuck in our own echo chamber sometimes, so we'll keep talking about the things that we enjoy.
Pete, question for you. It's been the Olympics. We kind of haven't mentioned that. If you could be pretty confident about winning a gold medal for something that's not an Olympic sport, could be anything, what would it be?
Good Lord. Great question.
We need your hidden talents, Pete. Where are they?
Build rapport with anyone. I think I could do that.
Yeah.
I think I could make a friend out of anyone. You could say there's an audience of 1,000 people. I want you to go and make friends with this person, and how quickly you can agree to have them on the podcast, agree to go for lunch together, do something. I think that is something that I am always trying to get better at. It's a passion of mine. I always say to my daughter, strangers are just friends you don't know yet. And some people might hate me saying that to my child because some strangers are very dangerous, but largely most people are good people. I like to optimistically think most members of the public are good people. Build rapport with anyone. Probably a rubbish answer. What would yours be?
Do you know what? I'd take anybody on Beat the Intro, Pete.
We could do that.
It would have to be.
Brother, I'm strong at that.
It would have to. There's only
the memory game.
There's only one.
I don't know if I could win an Olympics at it, but the memory game. When I went on holiday and I took with me, I'm insanely good at that game.
Wow.
Insanely good at that game.
Wow.
And there's a trick to it, which you may remember. There's the guy that holds the world record for it. I remember listening to a podcast with him, and basically it's embedding things in a story narrative that's already familiar to you.
Yeah.
That's how you remember stuff. You make it part of your world. Like, when you're studying for an exam, you open up the cupboards and you've got little sticky notes everywhere and stuff like that. When you're trying to do the memory game, take a tour of your house. I went on holiday and I took with me one teddy bear. So I'm walking up to my house. On one of my cars at the front of the house, there's a teddy bear sat on the bonnet. And it stands out to me because it's strange. Why is a teddy bear there? And then the next person, I took with me 2 suitcases. Okay, so maybe the teddy bear was on top of 2 suitcases next to the car. And 3 giraffes. Okay, and as I'm trying to get in the front door, there's 3 giraffes stood in front of the front door. And I'm painting this picture constantly in my head. Then I go through the front door, and I've got all the rooms of the house I can explore. And if the game keeps on going, I can go into the garden, then I can come back, and I can go into the garage. And then if the game is still going, I can start walking into town. And I can see something outside my neighbour's house, and then something outside Tesco's or Lidl or at the post office or at the junction. And you can keep doing the game for as long as you need to until the other person fails to remember stuff. But if you're with someone that uses a similar template and they've practiced it, it can go for a very long. I've got up to like 40 things.
Yeah,
as in like 1 this, 2 that, 3 that, 4 that, 5 that, 6, all the way up to 40. I've got to against someone before. It's a big game.
That's incredible. That's an astonishing talent, that, Pete. I think, to be honest, that has to be your. Yeah, that's
probably the better answer. That's the Olympic one.
Well,
but when I see the Guinness World Records, it's ridiculous. The number of things some people have done. I think it's in the 100. It's over 100 things. Some people, and it's just like bloody hell.
So we've covered some ground today, and I wonder if, probably in closing, I guess, is what would you want to kind of say to? We've covered a lot, and thanks for sharing what you've shared today as well. And I know that being the host of many, many great podcasts that you do, it was just an opportunity, just as maybe a little introduction to this feature, just that we maybe just turn the spotlight on you a little bit. What would you kind of like? What piece of wisdom could you give the listener? Based upon what we've discussed today, is there anything you'd want to kind of? What takeaway would you want to leave with the listener?
Wisdom's a funny word, isn't it? Wisdom. I don't think I've got the privilege of saying I've got any wisdom, but I think it comes from experience. So maybe as a closing thing, I would say yes to more things, because I think you get experiences and wisdom and knowledge and humility and self-awareness from putting yourself in situations that maybe scare you a little bit, that maybe you think you're not ready for. And I'd say this especially to echo back on Sabrina Cohen-Hatton's book, The Gender Bias. Like some of our female colleagues that are out there, you're far more capable than you think you are. Don't wait until you're fully ready. And it does go for men as well. Go for it now, even if you think you're only 70% of the way there. Because by the time you're fully ready to come on a podcast, by the time you're fully ready to go for that promotion, compete in the British Firefighter Challenge, go to the seminar, whatever, it will be not too late, but like you should have gone earlier. Do you know what I mean? So say yes to more stuff. Engage in difficult conversations, because again, that's one of them. You're like, well, I'm not ready to talk to Carl yet. You never will be. Eat the frog. Go for it. Good.
Thank you. And just looking forward next month.
Yes,
hopefully
sir.
We'll be catching up again. The state of things.
Let's try and discipline ourselves.
This
isn't we should do this every month. We're going to do this every month. It might be shorter than this. It might be whatever, but we're going to do it.
The state of things with Carl and Pete. And again, just for listeners' benefit, give us a follow on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram.
Yes, sir.
Sarah does all the work behind the scenes, so a big up to Sarah. And
that was awesome.
If you've got anything that you want us to cover, any questions you want to ask, you can reach out to us, LinkedIn, X.
We'll put an email address underneath as well. We'll stick an email address underneath for those people that don't use social media, so we're not elitist, because some people say, I don't use any of those platforms, I'm not one of those social media people. Okay, no worries. There's a generic email address. You can get in on there, and there'll be the links to all the social medias as well. And thank you for your time today, brother. I always love our conversations, always love our catch-ups.
Brilliant.
I know this is newish for you. It's not new because you've been on, but I was like, dude, we're just going to hit record, and we're just going to go for it. We'll clip some bits out, or we'll use this, or we'll use that. But actually, total transparency, other than the bit where we went for a wee-wee in the middle, there's actually nothing I'm going to need to edit out. So this makes a very easy job for us for a quick turnaround to get this out there.
Perfect. And thanks for listening. And Pete, it's been absolutely fantastic to catch up with you. I always enjoy our catch-ups. And thanks for sharing what you've shared. I'm sure that there'll be many, many people out there that will really benefit from that. And I think it's been great to perhaps shine the light on you. And well done and thank you for what you do, because I think to get, if we think back to the first question around how the podcast started to where it is today, I know there's thousands of people that listen, and the feedback we get is phenomenal. Thanks for the feedback as well. So well done to you, and well done to Sarah.
It would have stopped a long time ago if it was just me doing it my own. That's what I said at the British. You can go faster alone and further together. So we're going a lot further now, and we're doing that as a team. And I really appreciate you and Sarah. So we'll wrap it up there, brother. Love you lot. Send my love to the family, and I will speak to you soon.
Cheers, Pete. All the best. Thank you.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests. And as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means that we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, towels, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you are in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.